So finally, the latest with the fight for some independent journalists to get press credentials for the legislature. If you've been watching Washington in Focus at all over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about this quite a bit. And in part, that's because we've had a dog in the fight. But it was last week that plaintiffs Brandy Cruz, Jonathan Cho, and Ari Hoffman, they lost their fight against the legislature to get credentials for the last days of the session. There was an emergency basically to go to a federal court to say, they've been denied press credentials. There's only days remaining of the session. We should go and grant them that. So the arguments were in federal court last Monday. Later the next day, they found out that they lost that with a federal court citing basically saying you're too opinionated as journalists. And so you don't have access under the guidelines set by those in charge of granting press passes. So, as we discussed a little bit in one of our podcasts last week, the Capitol Correspondents Association, which is made up of reporters from publications around the state who cover politics in Olympia, for 50 years, up until last year, this group was the advisory group to say who should get credentialed and who should not. And it was just ahead of the 2025 session that the Capitol Correspondents Association, the CCA, was saying that the Center Square should not be granted press credentials. We had to fight a little bit, had some of our legal folks push back, and ultimately were granted full press access. But then these other groups, including Jonathan Cho with Discovery Institute, he was denied credentials, ultimately given them. And then on the day he tried to get back onto the Senate side to attend a media avail, he was denied access. So that kind of set this whole thing spiraling forward. So fast forward to this year, and they again were denied. Brandy Cruz, Jonathan Cho, and Ari Hoffman were once again denied access to go back into the wings of the legislature for the Senate and the House, also to access to media availability. Unless you have a Senate credential, you're not allowed to go back into the Senate rules room where the Democrat majority has held their media avails throughout session. So the conflict is in that when the Spokesman Review put up their story about the result, they conceded to the fact that their organization has solicited funds to pay for the attorney that fought against the independent journalist to have access for press credentials. So maybe a conflict of interest. We talked about this a little bit last week. So I pressed a little bit more with Jackson Maynard, who is the attorney for Brandy Cruz, Jonathan Cho, and Ari Hoffman with Citizen Action Defense Fund, to basically say, I'm a little too close to the issue, maybe. You tell me, is this a conflict of interest?
I just found that really strange that they would they would have a reporter report on the case, and I thought it was good that they disclosed that conflict, that they were also fundraising for the opposition in the case. But I think it just goes to show that that there can be these conflicts of interest, and yet reporters, still are able to do their jobs, and in the same way that conflict shouldn't prevent the Spokane reporter from being able to obtain a press pass, and they acknowledged it, then whatever conflicts are present for my clients also should not matter. I mean, ultimately, having members of the press able to be there to ask the questions, to report on things, is really what's important. These conflicts kind of occur all the time, and they can be dealt with. And so, yeah, I thought that was unusual, but we'll see how things go from here.
So I did send a follow-up email today to the spokesman's executive editor saying, is this not a conflict? Your own reporter in coverage of this story is conceding that your organization is soliciting funds to support the attorney that is fighting against independent journalists to have press credentials in the Capitol. And if so, why are you doing that? I received a response back. She wrote, Our reporters and editors are not allowed to involve themselves in political activities, including participating in rallies, giving campaign contributions. If reporters at a political event, they should be there only as a journalist to help inform our readers. I did press further, questioning why the spokesman is at all funding an effort to keep other media out of access. Is not a full, um, press unbridled. It's in our state constitution. If some folks are on the left, some folks are on the right, shouldn't we all have access to ask the questions that maybe some other media outlets are not? And I did not, at the time we're recording this podcast here on Monday, receive a response from the spokesman. But if I do receive further updates, we'll bring that to you in tomorrow's episode of Washington in Focus Daily.